and issues. Hosting public forums like this one on issues important to the survival of democracy supports our mission of educating the public and ourselves. And the League invites anyone interested in supporting democracy in government to join us. Local news is a cornerstone of our democracy, but has been in crisis nationwide. Publishers on the peninsula are struggling too. At its 2024 annual convention, the League of Women Voters recognized that the decline of local news is a threat to democracy. So today we are delighted to hear from Adam Dawes, CEO of Embarcadero Media, about how the business has changed in recent years and how Embarcadero Media is evolving to meet these trends and preserve the Palo Alto Weekly, the Almanac, the Mountain View Voice, and the Redwood City Pulse for years to come. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Cheryl, for having me here, and all of you for coming to listen to me talk a little bit about the situation with local news and our situation at the Embarcadero Media Foundation. So I wanted to sort of start out and talk about my experience with the League, and it runs very deep. Many of you have already come up to me to recognize my mother, who in the near future, in the next month or two, is actually going to be recognized for being a member of the League for 50 years. So as it was, that takes me back to when I was a very small person. And apparently as a very young child, as a baby, I wasn't very happy about getting left home alone while my mom went off and did things that stimulated that adult part of her brain, which she found the League was a tremendous outlet for that. And so she would constantly get calls from sitters like, I can't do anything with this kid, like this kid is inconsolable. And so the solution, as many parents found was, and my mom found with me, was to just take me along. And I was happy as a clam. So I've been coming to League events for over 50 years myself, which is probably a bit surprising for somebody who's only 55 years old. So it is a bit of an interesting homecoming for me to be here. So thank you very much for having me, and for all of your, I mean, we view at Embarcadero the League as just one of those foundational organizations in the community that is fighting side by side with us in terms of preserving the community we have and moving our communities forward in terms of providing important, rich, substantive information to the community about how citizens can engage with their elected officials and with their with the issues that are happening. So we see a great kinship and love partnering with the League. So look forward to many opportunities to do that going forward. So aside from my long experience with the League here, I grew up in Palo Alto, obviously, and have basically spent my life here on the peninsula between Palo Alto and San Francisco. I currently live in San Carlos and took over from Bill Johnson, who was the founder of the Palo Alto Weekly. I took over from him as the CEO of Embarcadero Media about 2.5 years ago. And my background was, I think, interesting in terms of taking over from Bill. My career was actually spent mostly just over there on the other side of the highway on the Google campus, where I spent about 15 years of my career. So I was doing the whole kind of high tech thing. But I had long had an interest, a passion in media, which first came as I was editor of the Campanile at Palo Alto High School and a protege of Esther Wojcicki. And that kind of stimulated a bug in me. And in college, I worked on one of the papers there, and got involved in filmmaking and sort of aspired to be a documentary filmmaker, which is very much a different flavor of being a journalist. But I view a journalist all the same. And so I spent my early, years of college and after college very kind of preoccupied with the media and with news. Decided after trying to become that documentary filmmaker and working in that field for about a year that probably wasn't going to be the best thing for me in my life and what I wanted. So kind of saw the internet as this tremendous potential for communications and media and technology, really powering the ability for people to communicate and understand the world. And it has been that way. And so, I spent my time there, and about a dozen years ago, my family had been investors in the Palo Alto Weekly, and my father had been on the board of the Weekly for about 20 years, and he was deciding to kind of dial back his involvement in various boards. And so he and Bill were looking at new board members. And so Bill thought that with all of the changes that were happening to news and local news and the obvious importance of the internet, I mean, much had already happened. And my experience in the tech world, that I would make a good addition to the Embarcadero Media Board. And so about a dozen years ago, I joined the board and really started to get an inside look on what was happening with local media. And so that was a great experience, and I really enjoyed that. And then as I was sort of thinking about my future on the other side of 101 here, and realizing, okay, I've kind of worked through this chapter of my life and want to go do something else, and something that is more community focused, smaller scale. I was thinking about media, and actually had an opportunity in my last years at Google to work as a part of the Google News Initiative, which is a big program that they developed. It was sort of $100 million a year that they were investing in the news industry to help support the transition to the online world. That Google recognized that the internet had been very disruptive to the media business, and so it decided to try to help support the industry to adapt. So I was a part of that effort and focused on local news in particular, sort of thinking about that as a springboard into potentially doing more for Embarcadero. And so I spent a couple of years really, I kind of think about it as publisher school, where I had funds and access to the world of local publishing. So, scanning the horizon to understand who was adapting really well to this local news, who in the local news world was adapting well to all of these changes that were happening. And so I really got a bird's eye view of who was succeeding and where publishers were struggling. And so that was a terrific experience. And then as I left Google, decided to take over from Bill. He had been looking to find a successor for some time. And so that was all sort of worked out well. So that's what got me here. And I think I now want to kind of talk a little bit about the landscape of the news environment, and the challenges that we face ultimately, but the industry is facing. And it's not good news. And as Lisa talked about in her intro, that this is a local news is a critical piece of a functioning democracy, and that the changes to the environment are a threat to us and our communities across the country. So just from a kind of statistics perspective, there have been 3,200 newspapers who have shut down since 2005. And that is the rate of more than 2 a week. So every week for 20 years, 2 newspapers have closed across the country, which has left those communities oftentimes without any reporting capacity or resource to cover the institutions of the city. In California, there are 68% fewer reporters in this state than there were 20 years ago. So 2/3 of the reporting capacity of California has vanished in the last 20 years. And those are not the only challenges. I think trust in the media has also been a big headwind for us. The internet has opened up so many platforms for people to speak and to publish, which has really been a fantastic thing, not without some terrible side effects. But really that democratization that it has enabled has been great, but it has also come at something of the expense of, I think, the trust in media. So in 1976, over 70% of the US population trusted the media a fair or a great amount. And that has now declined to an all-time 1%. In fact, the percentage of people who have no confidence in the media at all right now is higher than those that have a fair or a great amount. So the environment that way has definitely led to a lot of the escaping of the audience to other channels throughout the internet in particular. We've seen trends like hedge funds become very active in the local news space. Local news historically, I mean, it is a subscription business, and there's a kind of constant revenue stream, and a lot of financial folks like those constant revenue streams. Even if they are on the decline, they're able to kind of engineer profitable ways to do that. And so there have been a number of hedge funds that have gone and made a very handsome profit by taking over local news outlets across the country, and then financial engineering them to be profitable for the investors, but at the great expense of the communities. So they have slash and burn tactics in terms of what reporting capacity that they put on the street. They sell assets. They disconnect their reporting staff from, being in the heart of the community to other places. And really, they have it's hard to see how there is any interest or care for the actual product that they're producing, generating the news, the investment in the local community, the value that provides the community. That seems completely devoid of all of their strategic plans. And it is simply a math problem for them to extract as much value out of these declining resources as they can until they're essentially worthless, and then they kind of just discard them. So kind of vampire-like behavior. And a lot of this is, obviously come at the been due to the changes that the internet has wrought. Publishing used to be, local news publishing in particular, used to be a fantastic business. Warren Buffett was a huge believer and investor in local news, in local newspapers across the country for many decades, because they operated as essentially these little monopolies where, you know, due to the fact that it was very expensive to print and, you know, put big stacks of paper in trucks and distribute them across the city, that was really hard to replicate. And so once somebody had figured out how to do that, they kind of garnered all the attention of the local community, and all of the retailers in the community knew if they wanted to get the attention of the citizens of the community that they would just, that was the place where they needed to get their messages out. And so advertising was fantastically profitable. And then they would also get money from subscriptions, and it was a fantastic business. And the internet changed all that for sure. So that geographically constrained monopoly all of a sudden became unbounded when everything was getting routed through one of these and wires. All of those distribution costs just fell away. And people's attention also started to get pulled to many different directions. And there was what across the street we would maybe call kind of narrow slicing of different opportunities. So, you know, back in the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s, the internet could be almost thought of as, or the local newspaper could almost be thought of as the internet of the day. That every day on your doorstep would come all of the information you needed to know to live a productive and engaged life. It would tell you about, you know, your sports teams that you cared about. It would tell you what the weather was. It would give you updates on the stock, on your stock portfolio. You know, everything you reasonably needed to know would be in those pages that landed on your doorstep. And what the internet then enabled was slicing all of that big bundle of information into very narrow particular things. So the best example, of course, is the classifieds. So, you know, if any individual wanted to sell something or look for a job or whatever, you know, they would get a classified ads or look in the classified ads. Extremely profitable for newspapers. But then with the internet, Craigslist was born. And that absolutely destroyed. That was a better way to solve that problem than doing it through print-based classified ads. And so, you know, over the course of a relatively short amount of time, something like Craigslist just completely took over that and eliminated or virtually eliminated that extremely profitable channel of business for the newspaper. And it kind of goes on that, you know, the weather, you know, who would go to their newspaper to look at the weather? Everybody just kind of opens up this thing and it's on your home screen, right? You know, your stock portfolio. What movies? Movie Phone. You remember Movie Phone? That was sort of a first verticalization of that thing that you used to rely on the local newspaper for, that would then got stripped away into this discrete sort of application or service to get that information. And so over the last, you know, several decades, that process has just continued. And what's left? What's left now are the things that are the most expensive and hardest to monetize by all of these players, all these kind of internet players that develop these things. So, you know, who's going to show up to the city council meeting or to the school board meeting to actually gather the facts and report back to the community what happens? We need to send at least, you know, one live body to these institutions to actually do the work, to gather the information, to sift through it, to organize it, to highlight what is critical for the community to know. And that is expensive work that doesn't scale. So that has been a major trend that from kind of an attention standpoint has been a challenge for local news, that so much of what we used to provide has been kind of stripped away by all of these other applications and services. I think on the other end is the advertising side. So we, the Palo Alto Weekly and our publications in general have been advertising supported over the last, since inception. And the retail environment and the advertising needs have dramatically changed too. So as I said before, if you wanted to get the attention of the local community, the place to be was the local newspaper. That's where the community's gaze was fixed to understand what was going on in town. And now that has dissipated, that's less compelling, and there are more substitutes for that from an advertising perspective. So Google and Facebook and other players, you can now do geographically targeted advertising. So you can focus on just the people in Palo Alto. You can just look for females between the age of 35 and 55 in Palo Alto and who are into beauty. So if you run a nail salon or, some other kind of business like that, then that might be a more direct and efficient way to advertise. So we're challenged that way. And the retail landscape has also changed. The internet hasn't just affected us, but it has affected the retail landscape a lot too. So we all use Amazon and e-commerce, and that solves a lot of our things that we used to run across town to do an errand, to go buy this or that. And so those retailers that used to supply all those goods for us have been challenged in this e-commerce sort of environment. And, big box stores, we go to Costco and Best Buy and such. And so our patterns of how we buy have shifted away from those kind of mom and pop based stores that, again, were kind of our lifeblood from an advertising perspective. So the advertising has been in decline for, over a decade, that those trends have really affected what has been our lifeblood from an advertising perspective. So those have all been the big headwinds that we have faced, and not just us, but the industry in general, which has led to the failure of all of these local news publishers across the country. Just to kind of talk a little bit more specifically about Palo Alto, about the Bay Area, and the news situation here. So there have been dramatic changes to the news landscape in the Bay Area. Many of you will remember, certainly the Palo Alto Times way back when, and a number of local daily papers, which then went to the Times Tribune, which then also folded here in the Mid-Peninsula. The changes that have happened with the Mercury, I think the other paper that many people have subscribed to for a long time, and it's thinning over time. So the Bay Area, I think, has been very ill-served by all of these trends. One of another local news publisher that is doing great work in the East Bay, called Cityside. They've done some studies trying to kind of compare where we are today versus where we were 20 years ago, and some of the challenges around local news in the Bay Area. So one important feature about the Bay Area is it is a cluster of communities, of different cities and municipalities. And again, from a democracy perspective, each of those needs and deserves its own coverage. There are over 100 city governments that make up the Bay Area. And they phrase this, I love this phrase, that they all constitute their own microclimates of power, which I think is very apt. So they have done so one of the things that Cityside has really pioneered is this transition in the face of all of these challenges, is this conversion to nonprofit. So they were one of the first sort of hyper-local news organizations to turn nonprofit. You know, it seems like forever, but I think it was only 5 years ago. And they estimate that there is less than $16 million in total philanthropic support in the Bay Area around local news. And to kind of, they are, you know, actually the heavyweight in the region. If you kind of break this down in a county by county level, they're based in Alameda. They've, of that 15 million, 6.6 is based in Alameda. In Santa Clara County, they estimated that there was less than $2 million in philanthropic support for local news. And in San Mateo County, less than $350,000. These are 2023 numbers. We've changed the balance a little bit, but this is Cityside. They're based in Berkeley. So that's in San Mateo County, that's less than 45 cents a person in the community. And this is all for print-based publications. And the way that I like to think about it is print, I say print in quotes because that can be online, digital only, or actual newsprint. We, I think, are really the sardines, if you will, in the news ecosystem, where there should be a lot of us and we should be everywhere. And as we collect information in aggregate, that's where, you know, the regional and the national players, they all piggyback on the work that we do. We did a story a week and a half ago that exploded onto the national scene, this thing about the crosswalks. I don't know if all of you saw that. So we broke that story, you know, and, you know, 2 days later, it was on the Rachel Maddow show. So that's how the news industry works. You need to have all of these, you know, sardines or capillaries or whatever out there in the world that is collecting that local information. And then you get, you know, recycling and reporting that pulls that up. I'm sorry, the story. So some clever person figured out that those crosswalk signal buttons that say walk, you know, or wait, that have that audio feature, that those could get hacked and you could actually change the message that they said. And so they, I guess, used AI voice synthesis to create these messages purporting to be either Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk. And they had, you know, rather humorous things to say, especially if you had a dislike for either of those people. So they loaded these up on crosswalks in Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Redwood City, and you know, for people who are not so happy with the administration, it was very entertaining.
When your reporting gets sucked up to Rachel Maddow or the New York Times or the Washington Post, is there any revenue that flows back to the foundation?
Those are just facts. That's what we do. That's what the news industry does. And they're, you know, things that are out there in the world that people can write about. So the nature of what we do is report on public information. We work very hard to find private information or information people want to keep private and make public if we feel like the public has an interest in knowing. But at that point, we are just grateful when they properly cite us. What often happens is it gets sucked into the media vortex and we're just sort of lost. So I was very happy in the Rachel Maddow thing. There were 4 tiles about outlets that had reported on this, but we were one of them, Palo Alto Online. So I was grateful for the acknowledgement. This I'm sorry, I lost the train with the sidetrack on the the donations in terms of this of the community supporting local news has been, that is really a new frontier and something that we as an organization decided we had to do in the face of our declining advertising revenue. We haven't just been sort of sitting there on our hands waiting for that to decline to the point to where we're no longer sustainable. We've been active at trying to beat that back as much as possible, but to develop other revenue streams. So about 10 years ago, we developed a reader revenue portion. So many of you may be aware and have experienced a paywall that we have on Palo Alto Online, on Almanac News Online, that after I think about 5 articles a month, we ask you to become a member and to pay us to get beyond that paywall. Very imperfect science. Anybody who wants to avoid it can easily do it, and many do. But that is another revenue stream that we developed over the last decade, and that now comprises about 20% of our revenue, a little less, maybe 15 to 20% of our revenue. But the other thing that we recognized was that was not growing as fast as our revenue, as our advertising revenue was declining. And so for us, I think the number is, since 2019, our print advertising has declined 44%. And so we looked at those trends and the fact that our membership revenue wasn't increasing fast enough, and we said we need to have another revenue stream. And so following on the success of Cityside across the Bay, and many other publishers across the country were discovering that this move to nonprofit opened up the opportunity for greater support from the community. So at the beginning of 2024, we made that shift, and that has been a tremendous help for us. So 2024 was our first year, and we were able to raise $1.25 million from the community. So we tried to get the message out that, hey, this game has changed. The business model is evolving. We need to adapt. And if the community wants to have local news be an important part of how things get done, how decisions get made, how the citizens are informed, we need the community to step up and show that it values that information. And the role we play in just having people in the know, not just about what's happening in City Hall or at the school board, but on University Avenue or California Avenue, and all of the other nonprofits here in this building and across the city that are doing tremendous things and to help the community, exposing that it really is an essential part of weaving the fabric of a community. So that if the community really values that, the community is going to need to step up and support it. So we we're very grateful about the outpouring that happened from the community in our first year and stepping up, and that had really arrested the decline that we've been seeing, particularly since COVID. And so we had been sort of going through successive years of mounting losses. In 2023, our operational losses were close to $1.5 million. And so that was, just continuing on that road would have led to fatality pretty soon thereafter. But we made these changes. We became a nonprofit. The community stepped up. So that's been, so heartwarming to see. And I think really is a testament to folks like you in this room and across the community that see the value in that. So we are, very happy about the performance of that, but that's year one. That's now an integral part of our business model going forward, that we need to year after year raise funds to sustain the journalists that go out and do all this great reporting. So back to the kind of city side numbers, they did some comparison about what things were like in 1990. Sort of this 2/3 of the reporters have been lost, and to kind of get back to that, just to cover the communities that we cover here on the peninsula, we'd need sort of a budget of $6 million. So we raised 1.25 last year. That was great. But I think, all of you might sort of say that we don't do as good a job as we did, in years past. And, that there's a very good reason for that, which is we don't have as many reporters as we did in years past. And that's really kind of the message and the partnership that we are trying to develop with the community, is like, how do we go from 1.25 million to 2 million to 3 million, and then be able to rebuild that capacity so that every week when it arrives, or every morning when you look at the Express, you see more and more articles that catch your interest, and that help you navigate your daily lives in this community, know where to go shop, where to go eat, whom to support philanthropically, where to volunteer, how to vote, how to engage in the public debate on an important issue. The more capacity we have as a reporting organization, the more we're going to be able to bring. And it is something that our editors are always frustrated with, the opportunities, the stories that they would like to do versus the stories that we're able to do. There is always a big gap there, just because we don't have the feet on the street to get that done. So I do want to leave some time for questions, but what can you all do? The first thing is, if you are not a member, which is what we call people who essentially subscribe to us, so that gets you beyond the paywall, please, we need everybody to step up and become a member if you're not already. And for those of you with the means and the desire and the passion for what local news does to support democracy here in Palo Alto and across the peninsula, we'd love you to consider a donation to support the foundation, to support this new revenue stream that we're trying to develop. So any amount is helpful, but obviously our more is better. And our success in being able to raise that $1.25 million last year, over 80% of that came from 30 people. So people that contributed between $10,000 and over $100,000 to us. And I know that might exclude a lot of the people in this room, but I'm sure even if that doesn't mean you, you probably know some people who that might mean. So if there are introductions or ways to connect me with people that have that kind of passion for the community and the work that we do, I would love to talk and find out more. So thank you, and happy to take questions. Bonnie?
You mentioned that there are fewer reporters. I wonder, what is the situation in journalism schools? Are people trying to learn how to be a journalist? Are there more of them, less of them? What's going on there?
I don't know in aggregate the numbers, whether or not that is, I'm not aware of any journalism schools closing. And we work closely with the local journalism schools. So we recruit out of the Berkeley and the Stanford programs. And there are also programs and those are kind of graduate programs, and to some degree the undergraduates coming out of those programs. And then there are other, San Jose State and some of the other schools also have journalism programs that we're a little less hooked into, but yeah, kids are still coming through those programs. The world that they're coming into is very different than kind of traditional journalists. There's a lot of interest in radio and podcasting from that group. So I don't know if we've hired anybody out of journalism school who hasn't also been hot about podcasting and tried to do podcasting with us, which we've done some experiments, but with limited success. But I think there are increasingly numbers of people who don't really go to journalism school at all and fit into this sort of news space, which they call creators. So that can be, anything from lifestyles or this or that, or it can be very entertainment oriented, or it can be very kind of newsy oriented. And the rules of the game in creator land are different. The ethics, the commitment to neutrality, the fact checking, all of those things, buyer beware. So I think a lot of people that might have historically been interested in a career in journalism are finding avenues through there and sort of finding their own way through those issues. Less so at the local level, but I think that's something to watch.
So this is more of a business model question than anything else, but I see all of these podcasters now on Substack and YouTube, and their business model is, I'll give you a little bit of information for free. You can sign up for free, you gotta follow me. But if you want to get to the deep interview I did with this important person, you would have to pay. And I'm wondering if there's a way you can experiment with that as a way to kind of suck people in, because the 5 articles, you're giving them the whole thing, and maybe I just don't like cookies and go on another computer and hope I can get around it. I don't know. I just thought that because we're not getting more used to that model, and is there value in you looking at that kind of monetization model?
Yeah. Do I need to repeat the questions? Okay. Everybody's able to hear. Yeah, there are myriad ways to monetize through content, especially online content, and a lot of different business models. And that is really tricky and complicated work to figure out how to best monetize. Oftentimes there are synergies between the type of content that they're doing and the particular model that they're using. So I think probably what you're talking about is well suited for long form content. That's where I've seen it the most. And where, oftentimes they'll still offer the long form content for free. And then there will be sort of this exclusive bubble, which my understanding of that model is it's really kind of a loyalty sort of super fan thing. like I've heard some people who use that model to say that really have your best content out there for free, and that generates loyalty, and that loyalty then is exchanged for some exclusivity to this content, but really to market as widely as possible to get your best stuff out there. So again, there are just infinite ways to slice this. And it's one of the challenges for us about doing that. And I think this is one of I talk about the paywall. One of the tensions we have now that we have converted to nonprofit, really we are a public service, and we have not, I guess I should just admit, internally not great feelings about restricting access to our content when it really is intended for the public. You know, it is a bit of a legacy from where we've come, and it is a very important revenue stream for us. And so we're talk a lot about whether or not we need to shift that into dropping the paywall and being free for all. But then we need to make sure we don't lose any of that revenue. And we have debates about whether or not it might actually increase that revenue, because that, I think, is an important value that we get to tell the community, that all of our information is entirely for the community. So I, love your feedback on that, how important that is. But those are some of the challenges with the particularities of the business model. Sir?
Yeah, so when you say you're a nonprofit now, what you're saying is you're a 501c3,
Correct.
because that then opens the door to a lot of people in the over 72 age bracket where they have required minimum distributions. And how
Absolutely.
you kind of let people know about that.
Thank you for the plug. So, yes, if any of you have any RMDs with extra cash floating around, we would be, I'd be happy to have a conversation. And I mean, that's just one thing about how I do business. I love talking to the community. It's one of the favorite parts of this job. So I'm generally available for coffee with anybody who wants to get one, who wants to talk about what we can do better or how we can better connect with the community, or to let me know how I should be fundraising and meeting people or connections that you might be able to have. So all of that support is and input is welcome.
Well, the reason I bring that up is, not all of us can donate 10,000, but, once you hit 72, you're gonna have to do something with it. And a lot of us can maybe 1,000
Mm-hmm.
a year, and that,
Yeah, that is, I mean, I think our ambition from a fundraising perspective is we would much rather have 100 people donate $1,000 than one person donate $100,000. We would much prefer that. Because, when somebody has some other cause that they want to put that $100,000 to, that's creates needs for adjustments on our side. But that doesn't typically, the risk of that is much lower. And I think just the breadth of support from the community is super important. I mean, this has been one of the things we've been most happy about, that in our first year, we had over 1,200 people donate to us. So that's a wonderful showing of support from the community. Other questions? Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Sunny, go ahead.
I know there are some national news that are also important for the local news. How do you sort them as far as fact checking before you put it on before you cover it on the newspaper? And how do you educate the public into fact checking the news so that there's no misinformation, disinformation? And I know that's really big right now.
Yeah. So 2 questions. On the national one, so generally we don't report national stories, but by virtue of these communities being what they are and the activity that is happening in these communities, often the national news finds us. And these are challenging stories for us right now. I mean, generally, that home field advantage can be really good for local publishers like us. So, you know, the failure of Silicon Valley Bank or Sam Bankman-Fried, or, you know, all of these things which are local stories too, but have all this national attention behind them. Those don't really fit into our beat structure very well. We still, you know, want to send somebody to the city council meeting. And so that's a scramble. It's moving very quickly, all hands on deck sort of situation, which we, you know, because of resources are struggle to follow. But of course we have great contacts in the community, and so we might actually be able to find people that can elucidate these stories better than the national news, who parachutes in and tries to cover the story. So that's an interesting space where we would love to do better. And that is one area where we're trying to make an investment to have kind of a reporter that is covering the sort of news, this effluent news that happens kind of regionally, that has great interest locally but has a broader scale. To your question about fact checking, yeah, that's a central part of what a traditional responsible news organization does. And is, I think, lost in the very chaotic information environment that we have now. And I think these are the sorts of things we need to talk about as the media, as the traditional media, constantly, about the value of that, about the fact that when we print something, we are liable for it. If we get something wrong and we slander somebody, like, that's a lawsuit on us. And the rules are very different online with respect to those things. And so that, and not to mention just the reputational effects, like, we're all about getting it right week after week as an institution. We're trying to develop your trust in the Palo Alto Weekly and Palo Alto Online. And so, you know, those sorts of traditional journalistic ethics and quality issues, you know, we just need to make sure that as that trust in the media has declined, there's still some advantages to it over the alternative.
That's probably what you should say, so that you get more
Yeah,
contribution,
but
how different you are.
that's right.
How
I
about
don't-
we just have like one more question?
Yes. Go ahead.
Endorse.
Louder.
I know it's a nonprofit you can't endorse, but can you still do candidate forums?
Yes. So we are now in the same position that I guess the league, I don't know if the league must or chooses to not endorse, must avoid, must not. Yes. So we're in the exact same position as the league, as a nonprofit. We cannot endorse candidates, but we can take positions on issues. But like the league, we take, as you know, most seriously, our obligation to our communities to inform them and educate them when it comes to election time. And so, given this prohibition to endorse, which I can't tell you how many people come up to us and lament that fact that we're no longer able to do that it's become clear how reliant much of the community was on that. But we thought very hard about how we were going to substitute for that last fall. And I'm very happy with how we did that. And we did that through a combination of forums. We had election forums for city council, actually multiple of them, and as well as school board. And online and in print, we did a package of information, a voter information package that included detailed profiles of all the candidates, disclosure reporting on the financing disclosures. And then we came up with what we call kind of the issue grid, where our reporters who are going to these council meetings, school board meetings, week in, week out, who know the issues that are coming to those bodies, sort of yes, no, a series of 20, 25 yes, no questions about their position on critical issues, housing, public safety, commercial development, all of these things, and boiled them down into sort of a series of yes, no questions and said, fill out the grid, candidates. And then we reported on that. And so our goal was to enable all of you to examine your own beliefs, more housing good, more housing bad. There's a spectrum there. You all probably fit in different places on that spectrum, but to try to identify the candidates who aligned with your own values there. So yeah. Thank you.
We really appreciated that grid that you had.
Yep. So we think that's a winner. I think we'll continue to do that, and we'll look for other ways to provide good information around elections. So I wanted to thank you all so much for your time and coming to listen to me. And again, all of your help to mutually inform citizens when it comes time to go to the ballot box. The league does just tremendous work there. And as individuals for supporting the community and hopefully for supporting us. So thank you.
We want to thank you, Adam, for coming and sharing your story with us and making us more aware of the issues with local news. So that concludes our program. Thank you all for coming. Our next league meeting is going to be the annual meeting on May 18th at 1 p.m. at the Palo Alto Golf Links. We're going to be adopting our program and electing officers and a couple other things. We're also look in your inbox the next voter newsletter, which could come at the end of the month. That will keep you up to date on things the league has been doing. The National League, as you may have known, has issued a statement that we are now in a constitutional crisis. That was picked up by the PBS NewsHour and several other national news organizations. So people are listening to the league's assessment of things and taking it seriously. So look for the voter coming out soon. Thank you all for coming.